Hi everyone. Welcome back to Woo Can Cook. My name is Wesley, and this is a show where we are slowly cooking our way through all of the food from my childhood. Today I am genuinely overwhelmingly excited to kick off a brand new series that I honestly have wanted to do pretty much since I started this channel, dedicated to cooking our way through recipes that I did not write, so that I can compare them to my own recipes and see how they might differ. Those following along with this channel who have taken on the task of doing an absolutely obnoxious amount of completely pointless counting may know that this is in fact the 200th video that we have made on this channel, meaning that there is finally enough content here for us to start comparing our Woo Can Cook recipes to other things. More specifically, first up on this very long list by requirement will have to be the single most popular Woo Can Cook video of all time, which is our PF Chang's Mongolian beef, currently clocking in at just shy of 200,000 views. Wow, by the way, that is such an incredible honor, and thank you all so much for that. So today we're taking a look at the highest rated Mongolian beef recipe that is currently circling the internet, which as of now is the Walks of Life Mongolian beef, one of my very favorite recipe creators too, I might add. Their take on the dish, though similar, has some different approaches to shallow frying and sauce development that I might not have considered doing myself, which should be pretty interesting. In addition to this, our Woo Can Cook recipe for Mongolian beef is also very old. I believe this recipe was published nearly 4 years ago now, meaning that we'll have the perfect opportunity to point out some of the glaringly obvious mistakes that my younger and less experienced self made, and how I might do things differently today. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so kicking things off here first, we're starting off with some aromatic veggies, which, as I expected, remain pretty consistently as the basis of umami in most stir-fry recipes. This is 3 cloves of crushed and minced garlic, followed by 1 inch or about 1 tablespoon of fine minced ginger, and about 6 green onions separated by their whites and greens, then sliced thinly on a bias. For those keeping track, our Woo Can Cook version calls for planks for these greens, inspired by the PF Chang's version, which I actually think held together better in the fry because of their larger shape, as we'll see in a moment. Next up is our steak. Now this is the one and only substitution that we're making today, but I think it's a fairly reasonable sub though. The Walks of Life recipe calls for flank steak. This is actually skirt steak that I'm using because I couldn't find any flank steak today. It is a similarly lean cut with very distinct grains, making it easy for us to be intentional about chopping against the grain as much as possible. Personally, I find that flank, skirt, and top cut sirloin are all fairly interchangeable as needed. In the Woo Can Cook version, we work with both flank and top cut sirloin with fairly similar results. Next up, moving on to our marinade, here are a few elements that I would do differently personally, plus one very critical step that I didn't do in our own recipe, which, there's no other way around it, that's just a mistake. First up, this is a single teaspoon of soy sauce, followed by 2 teaspoons apiece of neutral oil and Shaoxing wine. For me personally, I would have used sesame oil here instead of neutral oil for its aromatic qualities, though either way I do think that the addition of fat is going to be very important for cohesion with our cornstarch coating coming up. Finally, rounding this all out is a 1/4 teaspoon of baking soda and a single tablespoon of cornstarch, which I just straight up forgot to add to our own version. This baking soda is going to enact a process known as velveting, which will break down the protein structures in our steak, resulting in a more tender piece of beef. It is an absolutely critical step in making Mongolian beef, or really any recipe using flank steak or skirt steak, and you should absolutely be doing it. Sorry y'all, my bad. In any case, we're mixing this into a paste, then combining with our steak and letting marinate for 1 hour. Moving on to our sauce next. Now, one thing that stood out to me quite a bit in this recipe is that their sauce functions more like a glaze here, rather than a sauce, meaning that we're going to be reducing it pretty aggressively, then adding our proteins in essentially at the very last moment to coat. This in turn thoroughly coats the beef without leaving very much sauce behind, sort of like how a General Tso's chicken or orange chicken might be done. I personally prefer more of a sauce than a glaze for a Mongolian beef, as we did in our version, but more on this in a moment. In any case, first up, this is 3/4 cup of hot water that I'm combining with 4 tablespoons or a 1/4 cup of brown sugar, creating the prerequisite sugar element that we'll need in order to form a glaze. Then next, I'm combining this with 4 tablespoons of soy sauce and a single teaspoon of dark soy sauce, then mixing this all to combine. Next up, circling back to our steak, I'm doing a quick cornstarch dredge here. This is about a half cup of cornstarch that I have in a flat tray so that we may coat our steak one piece at a time. Over on the stove, I have my wok heating up over high heat, then I'm adding a whopping 2/3 cup of neutral oil to the wok, then as always, long yao for that nice non-stick surface. For reference, the Wukan Cook version calls for a sear in about a 1/4 cup of oil, followed by a brief toss for wok hei. 2/3 cup of oil in a wok like this is effectively just going to shallow fry the steak rather than sear, as you may notice in our own attempt. I will point out that this recipe does call for a flip to the steak, which I did genuinely attempt, but it just didn't really seem to matter at a certain point, since we're basically just shallow frying our steak into steak nuggets. There is of course nothing wrong with this. Obviously these are crispy pieces of beef chunks, what's not to love, but personally I like a softer and more toothsome steak for myself, which we achieved in our version using a flash sear and fry. In any case, moving on, the recipe next calls for us to reuse this residual oil for our stir fry, but as you can see here, it is very dirty and black, so I'm gonna go ahead and pour this out, clean out my wok, reheat, and add an additional 1/4 cup of oil to the wok. Then going in here first is my ginger and Tianjin peppers, which were blooming for about 15 seconds until fragrant, followed by our garlic and the whites of our green onions. I'm sauteing this for an additional 15 seconds before adding in my sauce mixture, bringing the heat down to a medium-low temperature and reducing for about 2 minutes before adding in a cornstarch slurry comprised of 1.5 tablespoons of cornstarch dissolved in water. We're reducing our sauce for an additional 1 to 2 minutes until thickened enough to coat the back of a spoon, then killing the heat, adding our beef and greens of our green onions to the wok, and tossing this all to combine. Finally, I'm serving this all over rice, and we're ready to eat. Okay, so let me first acknowledge that the Woks of Life is one of my absolute favorite recipe blogs on the internet right now. I think the stuff that they're putting out is the perfect meeting place of really classic Chinese restaurant cooking, combined with thoughtful tweaks to make their recipes compatible for home cooking. We've avoided the deep fry here entirely, which I know a lot of you will absolutely refuse to do, and more importantly, the number of pantry ingredients in this dish is honestly very minimal, basically just Shaoxing wine and dark soy sauce. Again, I know for a lot of folks, many people will avoid wok cooking entirely because of the lengthy ingredient list. The result is a lightly sweetened Mongolian beef that's slightly less salty than most that I've come across, with a really prominent crisp and crunch to the beef as well. Relative to our own Wukan Cook recipe, I do still think that it's a little unusual to shallow fry a Mongolian beef, which in turn yields a level of crispiness that is very similar to pretty much all of the fried chicken dishes that we've done on this channel, sort of like something that you would find on the Panda Express menu. Then to account for this, the dramatic reduction of the sauce element into a glaze was a pretty interesting and unusual choice for me as well, yielding a dish that feels more like a General Tso's beef rather than a Mongolian beef, since the glaze mainly just coats the protein rather than soak into the rice like a sauce. In any case, I hope y'all try this and let me know how it compares to the Wukan Cook recipe. Okay, so that's it everyone. I hope you enjoyed this and I hope you give this one a shot. For those who are new to the channel, this one is part of a brand new series dedicated to reproducing popular recipes on the internet, so definitely check out that series next if you haven't yet, and let me know what you want me to cook next. As always, like, comment, subscribe, share, be nice interneters, and I'll see you soon. Bye. Cause all around I see chaos.